I never thought I'd find myself in a moment like this. Standing alone in the dim glow of the bathroom light, staring at the delicate fabric in my hands. The soft cotton, the lace trim, ruined. Stained. At first, I thought maybe it was just water. A careless splash from the sink. I pressed my fingers against the fabric, rubbing lightly between my thumb and forefinger. But the texture was all wrong. It wasn't water. My breath hitched, and I pulled my hand back as if burned. My heart started pounding, so hard it echoed in my ears, muting everything else. A single thought slammed into me like a freight train. This wasn't an accident. Someone did this. I should have been disgusted. Angry. Something. But instead, I just stood there. Frozen. My mind looping back, retracing my steps, searching for an explanation that wouldn't make my stomach twist the way it was twisting now. An hour earlier, everything had felt normal. I'd stepped into the shower, letting the water scald my skin, washing away the exhaustion of the day. It had been one of those long, draining afternoons where Winston barely said a word to me after getting home from work. Dinner had been quiet. A few obligatory words exchanged, nothing more. I'd left my clothes on the floor, planning to grab them once I dried off. It wasn't like anyone else cared. Winston wouldn't notice. He never did. But someone noticed. Someone had been here. I lifted my hand slowly, my fingers still damp. My own pulse thundered beneath my skin, and I could feel it, this sharp, unnerving sensation, curling in my stomach. Who? The question circled like a vulture. My mind screamed at me to think rationally, to piece things together. There were only a few possibilities, but none of them made sense. The house was quiet now. Too quiet. My own breathing felt too loud in the stillness. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. A strange warmth crept up my spine, not fear. Not anger. Something else. Something more dangerous. I should have thrown the underwear straight into the laundry. Scrubbed my hands. Shoved this moment into a locked box in my mind and walked away. But I didn't. I just stood there. Staring. Feeling. And worst of all, wondering. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of my own thoughts pressing down on me like a thick fog. The sheets felt cold. The bed, too big. And beside me, Winston lay still, his breath slow, steady, distant. I turned onto my side, watching his silhouette in the dim light from the hallway. For a moment, I tried to remember the last time we had really looked at each other. Not in passing. Not out of obligation. But truly seen one another. It had been a long time. Too long. I closed my eyes, forcing myself back, trying to dig through the years, searching for a moment that didn't feel so hollow. I used to know the way he smelled, the way his hands would linger on my waist when he pulled me close. I used to crave the sound of his voice, the low murmur in my ear when he whispered something only meant for me. But now? Now, we were strangers living under the same roof. It hadn't happened overnight. That's the part that scared me the most. It wasn't like we had some big fight or a moment that split us apart. It was slow. Subtle. A series of small, quiet goodbyes neither of us had spoken out loud. At first, it was little things, the way his kisses in the morning grew shorter, how his hand stopped reaching for mine when we walked side by side. Then, the conversations became routine. Simple exchanges. Did you pay the electric bill? What do you want for dinner? Don't forget to lock the front door. Now, I could sit in a room with him for hours, and we could go the entire time without saying a single word. Maybe I should have fought for him. Maybe I should have tried harder. But part of me wondered if he even noticed. I turned over, facing the wall, gripping the edge of the blanket as my mind wandered to the last time we were intimate. I had stopped counting the weeks. Maybe even months. It wasn't like he rejected me. That would have been easier to understand. No, Winston was polite. Detached. I'm just tired, babe. Long day at work. Maybe this weekend. Excuses. Every time, another excuse. At first, I told myself it was normal. Life got busy. People changed. But the longer I went without feeling his hands on me, the harder it became to ignore the truth. He didn't want me anymore. And I didn't know how to fix that. I rolled onto my back, staring at the ceiling again, feeling the same cold emptiness settle over me. And then my mind drifted, uninvited, unstoppable, back to the bathroom. To the moment my fingers brushed over that damp spot on my underwear. To the realization that someone had done it on purpose. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the thought away, but it was already there. Pressed into the darkest corners of my mind. It wasn't just the act itself that lingered. It was what it meant. Someone had been thinking about me. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't invisible. And that terrified me more than anything. The morning after that night, everything felt different. Not in a way that anyone else would notice. The world kept turning, breakfast still needed to be made, and Winston still left for work without so much as a second glance in my direction. But inside me, something had shifted. I told myself I wasn't going to think about it. I wasn't going to let my mind linger on the bathroom, on what I had found, on the unsettling realization that someone in this house, someone close, had done it. And yet, I did think about it. Every time I moved, every time I looked down at my hands, I thought about it. I wasn't sure if I should be disgusted or flattered. It wasn't long before I started noticing him. Cade Graves had been renting the guest house on our property for nearly 6 months now. He was young, mid-20s, maybe, polite, respectful, always keeping to himself. Winston had known his family, and when Cade needed a temporary place to stay, he had offered him the guest house without hesitation. I never paid him much attention before. He was just there. Someone who came and went, who gave a casual nod when we passed each other in the driveway. He never lingered, never spoke unless spoken to. But now? Now, I couldn't ignore the way his eyes held mine a second too long. It started small. Subtle. A glance over his shoulder when I stepped onto the porch. The way his hands hesitated when I handed him a glass of water one afternoon. A shift in his posture, like he was watching me, studying me, memorizing something. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. I was projecting my own thoughts, making something out of nothing. But the longer I watched him, the more certain I became. He wasn't looking at me the way he used to. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I caught him standing by his truck in the driveway. His back was turned, but something about his stillness made me pause. I stood at the kitchen window, drying my hands, pretending not to notice. And then, slowly, he turned his head. Our eyes met through the glass. It should have been a fleeting moment, one of those accidental glances that people exchange before quickly looking away. But Cade didn't look away. He held my gaze, steady, unblinking. And I froze. It was subtle, but I saw it. That look. It wasn't the look of a polite tenant. It wasn't casual or indifferent. It wasn't innocent. Heat crawled up my neck, and I forced myself to move, to turn away, to breathe. I gripped the edge of the sink, my pulse pounding in my ears. It was nothing. It had to be. Maybe he was lost in thought. Maybe I was reading into it too much. Maybe, I closed my eyes, but that image was already burned into my mind. The way he looked at me. Like he knew. Like he had been thinking about me. And the worst part? I didn't hate it. It started small. Little things that, at first, didn't seem like much. A lingering moment in the kitchen when I passed him a glass of water. The way he stood a little closer when he spoke, his voice just low enough to make me lean in. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing I could call out. But I felt it. A shift. A slow, dangerous pull. I started noticing how often he was around. How he always seemed to be outside when I stepped onto the porch. How he lingered by his truck just long enough for me to catch him before he left. It wasn't just him. I changed, too. I found myself dressing differently. Nothing obvious, just little things. Softer fabrics. A neckline that dipped a little lower. Shorts that weren't quite as long. Perfume I hadn't worn in years. I told myself it was silly. That I was reading too much into this. That I was just craving attention, and he happened to be the one giving it to me. But deep down, I knew. I caught his eyes on me more than once. He wasn't just looking, he was watching. Studying. Waiting. And the worst part? I wanted him to. The night it finally happened, I wasn't expecting it. Winston was out of town for work. He hadn't even kissed me goodbye. Just a quick, distracted "see you in a few days" before grabbing his bags and walking out the door. That night, I poured myself a drink. One turned into two. I was sitting on the porch, the warm night air wrapping around me like a blanket, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, and there he was. Cade stood at the bottom of the porch steps, hands in his pockets, his gaze settling on mine in that same steady, unreadable way. "Didn't mean to sneak up on you," he said. His voice was different, lower, quieter. "You didn't." He hesitated, then nodded toward the bottle next to me. "Rough night?" I should have laughed it off. I should have said something casual, something to make the moment feel normal. But I didn't. Instead, I picked up the bottle and tipped it toward him. "Want some?" He didn't answer right away. He just watched me, like he was waiting for permission. Or maybe a sign. Finally, he stepped onto the porch and sat down beside me. "This is wrong, you need to stop, you need to walk away." I pulled back so fast it felt like I couldn't breathe. The word barely formed on my lips before I stood up, nearly knocking over the glass beside me. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Cade was still sitting there, breathing heavy, his hands clenched into fists on his thighs. He didn't move. He didn't try to pull me back. He just watched me, waiting, letting me decide. I should have apologized. I should have told him it was a mistake. But I didn't say anything. I turned and went inside. And that should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The next day, I couldn't think about anything else. I barely ate. Barely spoke. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the ghost of his lips on mine. I told myself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness. That it wouldn't happen again. I was lying to myself. Because when I stepped outside that evening, Cade was already there. Leaning against his truck, arms crossed, waiting. Waiting for me. Our eyes met, and something electric passed between us. A secret. A sin. A dare. I should have gone back inside. Instead, I walked toward him. The affair didn't happen all at once. It unfolded, slow and dangerous, a game we both knew we shouldn't be playing. At first, it was small. Every stolen touch, every hurried kiss, every second spent tangled in something we shouldn't be doing only made it harder to stop. And Winston? He never noticed. He was buried in work, buried in his own thoughts, buried in a marriage that had faded into nothing but routine. He never asked where I was going. Never questioned why I took longer to get home. Never looked at me long enough to see the changes, the way my skin flushed, the way my breath caught at the sound of Cade's name. He was oblivious. And the deeper I fell, the more reckless I became. Because the secret wasn't just dangerous. It was a rush. And I didn't want to let it go. Guilt has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. It doesn't slam into you all at once. It sneaks up, slow and quiet, wrapping around your ribs like a vice until you can't breathe. Until every stolen moment feels heavier, every whispered name feels like a betrayal that lingers on your skin. And yet, I still couldn't stop. By now, the affair had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just impulsive kisses and hidden glances anymore. It was planned. It was intentional. I would lie awake at night, listening to Winston's soft, steady breathing beside me, knowing that just hours before, I had been wrapped in someone else's arms. And worse, I wanted more. But the deeper I fell, the more dangerous it became. It started with little things. Winston coming home earlier than expected. A question that seemed too casual, too careful. "Where were you today?" I forced a smile. "Out running errands." He didn't press. He never did. But there was something different in his eyes. A flicker of something I couldn't quite place. Did he know? Was he starting to see the way I avoided his touch, the way I felt like a stranger in my own home? I told myself I was imagining it. That I was being paranoid. That as long as I was careful, as long as I kept my secrets locked away, everything would be fine. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. Then, there was Cade. At first, he had been just as careful as I was. Just as cautious. But something was changing. The way he looked at me wasn't just hunger anymore, it was possession. He started finding excuses to see me. To touch me. To be near me, even when it wasn't safe. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, when I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there he was. I barely had time to react, before his fingers brushed the small of my back. "Cade," my voice came out sharper than I intended, and I stepped away, glancing toward the living room. Winston wasn't home, but that wasn't the point. Cade didn't move. His eyes locked onto mine, intense, unreadable. "I don't like sneaking around," he muttered. My stomach twisted. "We don't have a choice." His jaw clenched. "Maybe you don't." I stared at him, my heart pounding. It was the first time he had ever hinted at something more. Something outside of stolen moments. Outside of just an affair. And it terrified me. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. It wasn't just guilt anymore. It was fear. Not of getting caught. Not of Winston finding out. But of what I had started. Of what I had let myself become. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over Cade's name. I had to stop this. I had to end it before it went too far. But before I could even type a message, my phone buzzed. A text. From him. "I need to see you." I should have said no. But I didn't. Because no matter how much the guilt burned inside me, no matter how high the stakes had become, I still wasn't ready to let go. Lies are fragile things. You think they're solid, that they'll hold if you just keep stacking them carefully, one on top of the other. You convince yourself that if you're careful enough, precise enough, no one will ever notice. But then one small crack forms. And before you know it, the whole thing is crumbling beneath your feet. That's how it happened. Not with some dramatic, earth-shattering revelation. But with something small. Something I never would have noticed, if Winston hadn't noticed first. It was late. The house was quiet. I had just stepped out of the shower, wrapping a towel around myself, when I heard it, his voice. "Elle." There was something in his tone that made my stomach tighten. I turned the corner and found him standing in the bedroom, his back to me, staring down at something in his hands. I swallowed hard. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer right away. He just turned, slowly, deliberately, and held up my phone. "Who's Kay?" My heart stopped. For a second, I thought maybe I had misheard him. Maybe this wasn't what I thought it was. But then I saw the screen. My messages. Open. The last one was still visible. "I need to see you." Sent by Cade. Panic surged through me, hot and suffocating. "Give me my phone." My voice was too calm. Too controlled. Winston's eyes searched mine, his grip tightening around the device. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. Who is he? He asked, voice low. No one. A lie. A stupid, obvious lie. He let out a breath, a bitter, humorless laugh. You think I'm an idiot? Winston, I reached for the phone, but he stepped back. No, he snapped. Not this time. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Stay calm. Stay in control. It's not what you think, I tried again. Another lie. And he knew it. Because the next thing he said made my blood turn to ice. I smelled cologne in our bedroom last week. My body went still. He had noticed. All this time I had convinced myself he wasn't paying attention. That he was too distracted, too wrapped up in work, too distant to see me. But he had seen me. Maybe not the way Kate had. But enough to know. I should have confessed. I should have told the truth, taken the consequences head on, ended this before it got worse. But instead, I doubled down. I don't know what you're talking about. He let out another bitter laugh, shaking his head. You really think I'm that blind? A sharp silence stretched between us, thick with everything we weren't saying. Then, he tossed my phone onto the bed and turned toward the door. Where are you going? My voice came out too fast, too sharp. He didn't answer. He just walked out. And this time I had no idea if he was coming back. Some moments split your life in two. Before and after. Before, I was a woman caught in a cycle of loneliness, reaching for something forbidden. After, I was standing in the wreckage of my own choices, knowing there was no way to undo what I had done. The only thing left was the fallout. And no matter what I chose next, nothing would ever be the same again. It didn't take long for Winston to find the truth. Maybe it was a misplaced piece of clothing. Maybe it was a careless whisper, a text I forgot to delete, or a moment where Cade and I let our guard down just a little too much. Or maybe it was that Winston had always known, and he was just waiting for the proof. I came home late one night. The house was dark, but something felt off. The air was thick, heavy, like the moment before a storm. Then, I heard the voice. So this is him. Winston's voice. Cold. Flat. My stomach dropped. He was standing in the living room, and across from him, Cade. I barely had time to speak before the first punch landed. It was fast. Brutal. A sharp crack of knuckles against bone. Cade staggered back, wiping blood from his lip, eyes flashing with something dangerous. I tried to step between them, but Winston wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at me. And what I saw in his face wasn't just anger. It was disgust. Was it worth it? He asked. His voice was eerily calm, but I knew what was underneath. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because I didn't know. I didn't know if it was worth it. If the thrill, the attention, the fire Cade had ignited in me was worth the ruins of my marriage. If it was worth losing everything. Winston walked out that night. He didn't come back. And Cade? He left, too. Because he never really loved me. He had never wanted more. I was just a game to him, one that had finally stopped being fun. In the end, I was alone. And for the first time, I realized what that truly meant. I had to end it. Before it was too late. Before Winston found out. Before the guilt ate me alive. I met Cade one last time. We can't keep doing this. My voice was steady, even though my heart was hammering. His expression flickered. You don't have to do this. But I did. Because every time I looked at Winston, I saw the life we had built. The man I had promised forever to. And I couldn't keep lying. It's over, I said. And this time, I meant it. That night, I sat across from Winston at the dinner table, my hands clenched in my lap. I need to tell you something. He looked up, tired, distracted. Distant. the way he always did. But this time I wasn't going to let that be an excuse. So I told him. Everything. The affair. The why of it all, the loneliness, the way I felt invisible, the ache I had been carrying for years. I expected him to yell. To leave. To hate me. But he just sat there, silent, letting it sink in. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. You should have told me sooner. It wasn't an excuse. It wasn't forgiveness. But it wasn't the end. We went to therapy. We talked, really talked, for the first time in years. Did we fix everything? No. But we tried. And for now, that was enough. Winston didn't yell. He didn't throw accusations, didn't demand answers. He just looked at me. And then, slowly, he smiled. So, he said, voice unreadable. Now we're even. I froze. The words didn't make sense at first. My brain struggled to connect the dots. Then, I saw it. The way he was too calm. The way he wasn't surprised. The way he wasn't angry. My stomach turned. What are you talking about? He leaned back, exhaling slowly. You think I haven't noticed how distant we've been? His gaze flickered over me, sharp. Knowing. You think I haven't noticed how distant I've been? Something cold slid down my spine. Winston. He smiled again, but there was no warmth in it. I didn't want to be the first to admit it. My breath caught. He had someone else. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe it was someone he met on one of his business trips. Maybe it had been happening for months, or maybe years. But the truth was there, staring me in the face. I wasn't the only one keeping secrets. And suddenly, I didn't know if I had lost him, or if we had lost each other a long time ago. There's no easy way to end a story like this. Some choices leave scars. Some betrayals can't be undone. And sometimes, the real question isn't whether the affair was worth the risk, it's whether the marriage was already broken before it even began. Infidelity isn't just about betrayal. It's about emptiness. About loneliness. About the spaces between two people that grow wider, little by little, until one day, they wake up and realize they're standing on opposite sides of an uncrossable distance. It doesn't start with a kiss. It doesn't start with a touch. It starts with a thought. A glance that lingers too long. It's about the gray areas of love and desire, the fragile threads that hold relationships together, and how easily they can snap. Maybe the real lesson isn't about who was right or wrong. Maybe it's about knowing when to fight for something, and when to let it go. That's the end of this story. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe for more real, thought-provoking stories like this. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done in Elle's place? Would you have stopped before it was too late? Or would you have let yourself fall?